This evening, what I'm going to speak about is extremely controversial. Whenever you call something, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, particularly on a college campus, it's going to be controversial. So it's absolutely critical that you listen closely, because I don't want you walking out of here thinking I said something I did not say. If you don't listen closely, the results can be disastrous.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So what are you thinking about? Let me ask you a question. Let's suppose that you go out on a hike somewhere, way out into the forest, and you get lost. Your cell phone dies, you're alone, you get turned around, you don't know what direction you were coming from, and all you have to get you home is a magnetic compass. And you take this magnetic compass out, and as you know, the magnetic compass is supposed to point to magnetic north, so you can figure out where your direction is. But instead of the magnetic compass pointing to magnetic north, the compass always points to you. How effective would that compass be? Would it be effective at all if it always pointed to you? No, it's got to point to a reference point, north, outside of you in order to give you some guidance. And so my question is, where does life's compass point? Is there a true compass to life? Or does the compass always point to you and to me? We get to decide what's right and wrong. We get to decide the right way to live. Or is there an objective right way to live? I don't know about you, but I think this is true. Whether God exists or not, you are not the center of the universe. And neither am I. Christians in here, and I know there's some Christians in here, hopefully there's some non-Christians in here as well. A lot of Christians think, you know, if things just don't go my way, somehow either God doesn't exist or He's evil. You really think that? What would happen if everything went your way every time? I don't know about you, but I'd be even more of a moral monster than I already am if I got my way every time. I'm glad things don't always go my way, although I won't tell you that, though, normally when they don't. So my question is, where does life's compass point? Is there a true north to life? Well, let me start by trying to get my cursor to work, which would be helpful. Let me start with Francis Crick, who looks a little creepy to me. Francis Crick helped discover the DNA molecule. Many of you know that. He was an atheist. And he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis, and here was his hypothesis. He said the astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. In other words, you are nothing but a molecular machine. You are nothing but a moist robot. You may think you have free will. You may think you're reasoning, but you're not, because every thought you have is the result of the laws of physics over which you have no control. So this is a very good, clear statement of what we call atheistic materialism. Now, if Crick is right, there is no true compass to life. There is no true purpose to life. You just die and you become worm food, and that's it. It's over. There's no ultimate meaning. But I actually think there is a real purpose to life. Your hopes, your dreams, things that you want to accomplish actually really matter, and they matter ultimately. But where do you find the purpose? I think you can find the true objective purpose to life in this ancient collection of manuscripts we put under one binding we now call the Bible. Now when people say, you believe the Bible? Are you kidding me? Come on, this thing has miracles in it. We know miracles don't occur. Is there a tornado coming through here right now? What is that? We know miracles don't occur. They were ruled out long ago. And by the way, this book was written down by religious people who embellished it and made it up. You know, you can't trust religious people. They made this stuff up, and the Bible has all sorts of things we don't like about it, all sorts of morality in here we don't like. How can you believe this book is true? I mean, just even historically reliable. How can you believe that? Well, I actually think it's not all that difficult to show it's true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think if you take an honest look at the evidence, you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Yes, that is actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. if you're an insomniac Eastern time. So here in Oklahoma, it would be 8 and midnight. We're on DirecTV channel 378. How many people have DirecTV? Give us your hands, please. DirecTV. 14 of us. Come on, friends, don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get out and have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. It's on Roku. Have you guys heard of Roku? It's kind of a box you plug into your TV. Anyway, it's on NRB, the NRB channel, whatever that is, on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, there's this new thing. It's just come out called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Okay. It's on the Internet right here at our website, crossexamined.org. At those times, it's streaming live. We're also on radio every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Now, for those of you here in college, I know you're not up at 10 a.m., particularly 9 a.m. Central Time. You get up at the crack of noon. I understand that on Saturdays. That's okay. You can watch it, or you can listen to it, I should say, because it's streamed on the Internet. It's on iTunes. It's on our app. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. Well, obviously, let's start with truth. If there is no truth, or if it's just true for you but not for me, or all truth is relative, then the Bible can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then any book written by an atheist can't be true either. Right? So we'll deal with that question briefly first. The second question is, does God exist? Obviously, you can't have a word from God if there's no God. But I hope to show you tonight there really is a theistic God. What's a theistic God? A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. We'll look at 3 arguments for this being. And I think those arguments show that this being actually exists. Then we can look at question number 3, are miracles possible? Obviously, the Bible can't be true, or Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. But I hope to show you today that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. We'll see some of that tonight. The final question is the New Testament true? Now, the New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, God exists, and miracles are possible, then we can see if the events of the New Testament really did occur, such as Jesus predicting and accomplishing his own resurrection from the dead. Did he really do that? Or were those documents written down too late by religious fundamentalists who embellished it and made it up, and it didn't really happen? Now, some of you are looking at that going, wait a minute, Frank, what about the Old Testament? Do you believe the Old Testament's true? Well, look, if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Why? Who's in the New Testament that can authenticate the Old Testament? Jesus, right? If Jesus really is God, as the New Testament documents claim he is, now that's a big if, but if he really is God, whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, so if the New Testament's just reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Now, there's a lot more to the argument than even these 4 points. If you want to go deeper, we have a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We have a DVD set called Why I Still Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That's 12 parts. It's about 7 hours long. We have a new book called Stealing from God and Christians. This book is not about tithing, okay? People are always saying, is this book about tithing? No. The subtitle is Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And I've noticed that several times when atheists are trying to make a case against God, they're stealing aspects of reality that would only exist if God existed in order to say God doesn't exist. Maybe we'll see a little bit of that tonight, all right? Now, by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs, if you go to our website, all the proceeds go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know, I've got 3 sons, so I need some help. Actually, they're older now. They're grown. In fact, I was in the Navy for 8 years, as Kayla said. And Navy, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. When my sons were about to go to college, after college they wanted to go in the military, so they're thinking about ROTC or something. They said, hey, Dad, we want to go in the military. What should we do? I said, look, if you want to fight, go Navy. Right? Because wherever there's a problem, we just pull our aircraft carrier up and we take care of it. We don't have to ask anybody for permission for runways or any of that. We just do it. Okay? But if you want a nice life, go Air Force. Right? So they went Air Force. The oldest son is an intelligence officer. He's reading your email as you speak right now. He just won a PhD program from the Air Force. He's going to be one of only 3 captains to have the Air Force pay for his PhD, so that's kind of exciting to him. He already has a degree at the seminary. Now he's going to go and get a PhD at an Ivy League school, so he's excited about that. We are too. The second son is also a captain in the Air Force, but he's a KC-10 pilot. You guys know what KC-10s are. They're like DC-10s. They're big planes. They go out and refuel other planes. So what we say about our middle son, Spencer, is that every day he wakes up, he flies up to 30,000 feet, he sits around, and he passes gas. And he gets paid for it. Every man's dream. If I got paid to pass gas, I'd be a multimillionaire already. The third son's not in the Air Force, but he has graduated, and he's largely been out of the house, which means my wife and I have been empty nesters for like almost 3 years now. Took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. Yeah, that's how long it took to change the locks. Do we have any empty nesters in here? You see them over here? Look at these. Look at these people. You know how clean the house stays when they're gone? You ever notice that? They come home, you got to clean the house every 2 hours. They're gone 2 weeks maybe. All right, there's much I can't cover tonight. So if you want what I'm about to show you in the PowerPoint presentation, this is kind of cut off on the bottom, but this says crossexamine.org/FF, that stands for Fearless Faith. If you go to that website, if you type that into your browser and send us an email, I'm going to send you this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form, which is going to have a lot more slides than I can even show you tonight, plus a free copy or free chapter of the Stealing from God book and a few other things. Nobody else knows about this except the people now watching online because we're streaming this. And if you do that, and you send us an email, we'll send you that. We're not going to share your email address with anybody else, okay? So we're going to go quickly through the material. In fact, here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're just going to cover points 1 and point 2 because we can't get through all the material in one session. So maybe next semester we'll come back and do points 3 and 4. You can ask a question about point 3 or 4. And actually, if I time this just right, we'll cover point 1 and point 2, and then we'll have absolutely no time for questions. No, we'll have plenty of time for questions. The question mic is up here, and whether you're a Christian, atheist, or anywhere in between, just go up to the mic during the Q&A, and we'll try and avoid your question, okay? All right, so we're going to start right here at point 1, does truth exist? You guys ready to go? Yep. All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. Central Oklahoma? I don't know if the movie would have went anywhere if he said it like that. Like, can we try that again? Colonel, I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Much better, much better. Well, you know, there's a lot of people out there who can't handle, you know who would have been a perfect, in fact, I'm looking at him right now, who would be a perfect guy to play that part today? He's standing right there. The great Paul Blair, ladies and gentlemen, right there. He'd be, you can't handle that. He'd be perfect at that. Anyway, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here tonight, again, I don't care if you're an atheist, a Christian, anywhere in between, if you get this one idea down, it'll be worth your time. This is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And I didn't learn it until I was already 33 years old in seminary. I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know this. And it's so simple. Actually, I might have known it, but I didn't know I knew it. And you know it too, you just might not know you know it. And what is it that I'm talking about? This thinking skill right here, and let me illustrate it by example. If someone were to ever come up to you and say, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, simply say, hey, is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's a self-defeating statement. And what you're doing here is you're turning the claim on itself to see if it meets its own standard. And if you turn a claim on itself and it doesn't meet its own standard, it's false. It violates the law of non-contradiction. What's a self-defeating statement? Well, this is one. How about this one? I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, what would you say? Hey, you just did. Or, my parents had no kids that lived. Or, my brother is an only child. Like, these are self-defeating statements, okay? They don't meet their own standard. And if you get good at recognizing self-defeating statements, it will save you a lot of time going down intellectual cul-de-sacs and potentially save you a lot of pain and suffering as well. Because so many philosophies are based on self-defeating propositions. And once you learn that they're false, you can avoid them. Now, the only point I want to make here is, can everybody see, and this plays well in Oklahoma. Let me just show you this. Can everybody see that this claim shoots itself? Everybody got it? It shoots itself. Let's just do a couple more, because I just want to spend a couple more minutes on the truth section and then get right to the God section. How about this? You probably hear this a lot. There's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone were to say this, what would you say? Yeah, you might say, hey, are you absolutely sure? See, that's an absolute truth claim. You're saying it's absolutely true. There are no absolute truths. That's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. How about if somebody says you can't know truth? What would you say? Then how do you know that's true? How about if somebody says you should doubt everything? What should you say? Should I doubt that? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice that? This is the biggie, though. Whether you're a Christian, atheist, or anywhere in between, if you try and say something to somebody that they don't like, this is what they're going to say. You ought not judge. Now, what's the problem logically with the claim? Yeah, it's a judgment. So when somebody says you ought not judge, you ought to put your hands on your hips and say, then why are you judging me for judging? Now, by the way, for Christians in here, did Jesus say don't judge? No, he said judge not. Lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, take the log out of your own eye first. Then you'd be better to help your brother. Now, is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It is a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. And by the way, Jesus went after people who were judgmental. There's a difference between making judgments and being judgmental. Who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They ran Israel from the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, along with the Sadducees. They ran it. They were the politicians. And Jesus went after them. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. If you think Jesus was a sweet guy who never said a bad word about anyone, you have never read Matthew chapter 23. What does he say in Matthew chapter 23 to these politicians and religious leaders? He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all just get along, boys and girls? No! He was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? I mean, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter E. No, Jesus was tough, and sometimes you just got to be tough with people and tell them directly. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice when you compliment someone, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? Like if I were to say to Paul, Paul, you're a great pastor, I love you, everything you do is wonderful, you got a great church here, you think he's going to say, who do you think you are? Are you judging me? Do you think you're worse than me? No, he's never going to say that, right? Because people really don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. And if you say something that's true to somebody in a nice way and they're upset, you just help convict them. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. We don't want our deeds or evil deeds exposed. So if you expose someone's evil deeds, they may get real angry with you. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. You ever notice that? It happens. So don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. Don't buy into this idea you can't know truth or there is no truth. In fact, let's sum up what we mean by the truth about truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true. Well, you can believe the earth is flat if you want. It's not going to make it flat. And objective truths can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says there are no objective truths. What question should you ask them? Yeah, is that an objective truth? If they say yes, they've just defeated their claim. If they say no, it's just in me, the subject, it's just my opinion, you'd say, well, why should I believe it then? So you can't get away from objective truth. It's out there. Actually, there is one way to get away from it, temporarily. What you do, something we're all guilty of on occasion, we suppress it because we don't like it. We want to go our own way. In fact, Pascal put it this way. He said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. What are we going to find attractive today that we can believe in, even though we have no evidence it's true? And I know there's some folks in here who are from the Atheist Club. Thank you for coming. I want to give you a heads up before we do the Q&A so you can think about this question, because it's fair to, if I'm going to ask you a question, that you can think about it. And here's the question I ask atheists, particularly if they're a little bit hostile during the Q&A, and I don't think anyone here will be, but I ask this question just to see where they are. The question is this. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No? Wait a minute. I thought you were supposed to be the reasonable one. I ask you, if something were true, would you believe it? And you say no. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. For the people who say no, the problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They want to do their own thing, like I want to do half the time. They want to follow what they find attractive. In fact, the elephant in the room that I found, and maybe I'll be proven wrong here tonight, but in going to a lot of college campuses, the elephant in the room on a college campus is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. Nobody wants it. The Christians don't want it. We want the compass to point to us. We don't want there to be a compass out there pointing somewhere else that we have to align our lives to. That's the issue. And in fact, if I'm really honest, and again, you want to push back on this during the Q&A, go right ahead. I think the biggest elephant in the room is sex. I think that's really the issue. In fact, look at our culture. What do we argue over culturally? Sex. Abortion, same-sex marriage. We're arguing over contraception being paid for by the government. Now we're arguing over what bathrooms to use. That's really, it seems to me, it boils down for many folks, not everybody. I'm not trying to paint with too broad a brush, but it boils down to the issue of sex for many. Now, by the way, Christians, don't get all smug here, because this applies to you too. Are you just being a Christian because you find it attractive? But if someone were to ask you, what evidence do you have it's true? You couldn't say anything more than Jesus lives in my heart? Are you just believing it because you find it attractive? Well, I think that you can give evidence that God does exist, and then you can move on to these other steps, so let's do that. I think if our reasoning is good to this point, relativism and postmodernism can't be true because they claim there's no such thing as truth. They claim it's true there's no such thing as truth. And quite obviously, there is truth because they're making that statement and it's defeating their own statement. But now let's move on to the next question. Is it true that God exists? And we have to define what we mean by God. The God I'm talking about here is a theistic God. A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. Now, what evidence do we have for such a being? We're going to go through three arguments relatively quickly. We could spend a lot more time on them, but we'll just list them here and then we'll go through them. The first is the argument from the beginning of the universe known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe, and it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, in life, there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments have scientific evidence behind them. You can get evidence for these things by looking through a telescope or looking into a microscope, which we'll do. The third argument, however, doesn't have any scientific evidence behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. But it's the argument we've all intuitively understood since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. Or it's wrong to crucify children like ISIS is doing right now. Then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, no standard of righteousness outside of ourselves, then that's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion. It's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. It's just your opinion against ISIS's opinion. If there's one thing really wrong out there, like any of those things, then God exists. Why? Because He's the standard of goodness, and any deviation from that standard is what we mean by evil. But let's start here at the beginning argument, the argument from the beginning of the universe, and this is the argument many say points back to the big... Oh, Andrew, we need more sound on that. Come on. Come on, let's make sure we get a good bang here. There you go. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, the Big Bang. Now, I know there's a lot of Christians in here going, you know, Frank, we're Christians in here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is quite good. You even have atheistic scientists admitting this. For example, Stephen Hawking, who is the most famous physicist in the world today, says almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. He's a cosmologist, as you know. By the way, a cosmologist is not somebody that puts on your makeup, okay? He studies the origin of the universe, okay? And a Russian, now by the way, Hawking tries to come up with another explanation other than God for the beginning of the universe. I think he fails, but he's admitting the data. What's the data? That space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing. We'll see the implications of that here in a minute. Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist who's an agnostic, somebody who doesn't know if God exists or not, puts it this way. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, Vilenkin is a believer in the multiverse. Have you heard of the multiverse? That there are many universes out there, even though we can't detect them, and we just happen to be in the one that looks designed, even though it really isn't. But you know what Vilenkin admits? He says even if there are other universes out there, all the universes together require an absolute beginning. So it would seem to me you don't get rid of the need for an absolute beginner. It might multiply the need for a beginner, because you've got all these universes coming into existence. In any event, what's the evidence for this? We don't have time to get into it, because it's not even controversial. We cover it in the book, all the scientific evidence for it. But let me just give you one piece of philosophical evidence to show you that time had a beginning. Let's take a look at this timeline for just a minute. Here's today, there's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, there's last week. Let me ask you guys the question. Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. People argue over how old the universe is. Let's just leave that aside for a second. No matter how old it is, here's my question. Can this line be infinite into the past? No, why not? Why can't it be infinite? into the past. Because today never would have gotten here if there were an infinite number of days before today. You can't traverse an infinite number of days before today. If there's an infinite number of days before today, you'd always have to live another day before you got to this day. But since today is here, time must have had a beginning. In fact, if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. Now, this is a philosophical argument for the beginning of time. And whatever created time must be timeless. Well, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No, this is one of the answers to the question, who made God? Nobody. God is the unmade creator. He's the uncreated creator. He's outside of time. He created time. He's eternal, so he did not have a beginning. Now, there's scientific evidence for the beginning too, but that's some of the philosophical evidence. But it's not even controversial. Atheists are admitting that the universe had a beginning. So let's just jump to the bottom line. Here's the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my only question is, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? I think number 2 is more reasonable, but I was at Texas A&M, and an atheist said, I think number 1 is more reasonable. And I said, wait, hold on. Let's look at number 2 again for a second. Number 2 says someone created something out of nothing. Now that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's obviously absurd. Things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. So I said to the audience that night at A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. No, by the way, the law of causality does not say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be something that didn't come to be, something that's eternal, something Aristotle would call the unmoved mover, or the Old Testament would call Yahweh, I am. The same phrase Jesus used for himself, the self-existent eternal being. There has to be something that's uncaused. So I said to the audience that night at A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing by nothing in your dorm room and is currently defecating on your pillow. You don't worry about that. You're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear right here on the steps and start devouring people in the audience. Things don't happen that way. And if things did pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause, like if the universe did, why doesn't everything pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Why don't Mercedes-Benzes or Teslas, that would be even cooler, pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Why don't MacBook Pros do so? Could have saved me $3,000 if I was just a little bit more patient. If you're hungry after this seminar tonight and you go home and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit there, wait, and hope? It seems to me the atheists have all the faith that things are going to pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. That's why the question I like to ask is, to an atheist, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? The universe had a beginning, so there must be something that transcends the universe. Now you might say, Frank, this is going too quickly here. You're dismissing a lot of people that think there's evidence against this. How do atheists respond to this? Well, probably the most popular way to respond to it now is put forth by this man, Lawrence Krauss. Have you heard of Lawrence Krauss? He's a physicist from Arizona State, I believe, out in Phoenix. He's a very good presenter, very fun guy to listen to. Wrote a book a few years back called A Universe from Nothing, where he tries to explain how the universe could come into existence out of nothing. There's just one problem. His nothing is not the nothing of where the universe came from. His nothing is actually something called a quantum vacuum. And I actually critique his book in the first chapter of the book, Stealing from God, which is not about tithing. So if you're interested, you can check that out. But his position is so easily refuted that even atheists have refuted it. One guy in the New York Times wrote a scathing review of his book. This guy was an atheist. His name is David Alpert from Columbia University. He wrote such a scathing review of Krauss's book that all Krauss could do would be to call Dr. Alpert a moron. That's all he said. You're a moron! Which didn't sound like a good intellectual response to his article, in my view. Anyway, and the position is so easily seen to be inconsistent that even Stephen Colbert could see through it. So Stephen Colbert had him on his TV show. And I want to show you this clip. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes long. It's Colbert and Krauss. And watch when Krauss speaks. He talks about nothing as if it's something. He talks about things coming into existence out of something and pre-existing laws. And if you wait long enough, well, the universe came into existence out of nothing. No space, no matter, no time. But here's how Krauss was dealt with by Stephen Colbert. Check this out.
Okay, Doctor. Sweep away thousands of years of mystery and awe at creation that let the greatest minds in civilizations all over the world to lead to one point: a single divine loving creator. Destroy it. Why is there something instead of nothing?
It's really easy, because nothing's unstable. And in fact, there's no evidence for any deity. Everything we know about the laws of physics, which are remarkable and have changed everything about the way we think about the universe, what nothing is and what something is. This table here is mostly empty space.
This table cost me $500.
Well,
you tell me I got ripped off? Well, no, wait, let's go back a second, okay? Nothing is unstable. What do you mean that nothing is unstable? Nothingness is nothingness.
Well, the physics has changed what we mean by nothing. In fact, nothing is an empty space, is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence
no,
fast.
That's not nothing. That's something.
Why
are those virtual particles there?
Because of the laws of quantum mechanics. And they tell us that even though you can try and count and see what's in there in empty space, you'll see nothing. But in fact, one of the biggest mysteries, and the reason I wrote the book, one of the greatest discoveries of the last 50 years is that, in fact, empty space weighs something.
Empty space weighs something.
In fact, it's the dominant stuff in the universe. Nothing is almost everything.
I am never going to lose those last 5 pounds. Okay, you say there are 3 different types of nothing.
That's right.
What are the 3? I didn't know there was such a variety.
Yeah,
a sampler platter of
I would have thought
nothing.
you'd be an expert on it. But
on
in any
nothingness?
Case, yeah.
Yes.
In any case, there are 3 different kinds of nothing. First, empty space, which I'd say is probably the nothing of the Bible, an eternal, dark, empty void.
Do you mean like a true hard vacuum?
Exactly.
That's nothingness you're talking about?
Most people would have thought that would be nothing.
That's what I think nothing is.
And then I
also
tell you that,
Baltimore.
But then if I tell you that kind of nothing actually is unstable, if you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles.
By saying that it will...
If you wait long enough, the laws of quantum mechanics tell us that particles will burp out of empty space and eventually fill up a universe. It's really remarkable.
To me, that sounds like the empty space may be empty to us, but it is some sort of sheath or membrane between us and some other reality.
No, there's nothing. Well, there's absolutely nothing there until there's something.
What's the second type of nothing?
Okay, well then if you don't buy that, then I can say, well, you might say, well, that's not nothing because there's space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves and time can pop into existence where there was none before.
So in some theoretical end space, before the moment of creation, there can be no time and no space and no energy?
And no energy. Zero energy.
And then suddenly, from nowhere and from nothing, comes something and somewhere.
And all sorts of stuff. And it sounds like the ultimate free lunch. And
yes,
it is.
It is.
It is. And and what's remarkable is it's possible without any supernatural shenanigans. And
but listen, stop with that.
Why?
Why is what you're doing, whatever this is? Because obviously, because I am not in the priesthood, I can't understand the scrawls on the blackboards you people down at where are you?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, so you could.
Where are you? You're Arizona State.
Arizona State.
Okay. You priests of theoretical physics, you can explain to each other what you mean with your language of math. And I have to take that on faith.
No, in fact, you should be skeptical.
I am.
And in fact, you should, I know. And that's why you should. That's why I tried to provide the arguments in the book.
But I will never read it. So why other people should? You should buy it.
Buying it is important.
Buying it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, but why does what you're saying have to be an attack on my God?
It doesn't have to be an attack.
But that's all you've done. You've attacked my God for the last 6 minutes.
No, you have. All I've said is you don't need him.
That's an attack.
No.
Of course we are here to love God and serve God.
As we understand it, we've changed our minds about the universe. We've learned that the universe is more remarkable than anything we ever thought before. And in fact, changing your mind and in fact being wrong is wonderful. You should try it sometime. It's really amazing. It means that the fact that the universe is more remarkable than the fairy tales that were talked about by Bronze Age literate peasants before we knew the Earth orbited the Sun.
You're not attacking at all, but go ahead.
No, but I mean,
so you believe there's no God?
I don't even use the word believe. The point is there is
no God.
There's no need for God.
Is there God? Is there God?
It's
what would you say?
There's no evidence for God.
Okay.
There's no evidence for God.
So let me ask something. If there is no God, okay, if there is no thing called God, if he is nothing, can't something come from him?
Well, I don't know, you'd have to see the rest of the clip there, but notice what Krauss said. Krauss said that space-time and matter can come into existence as long as you start with space-time and matter. Well, of course, we already believe that. His nothing is not really non-being, it is something, and even somebody like Stephen Colbert could see through this. Now, the other explanation that's very popular right now is something called the multiverse, that there are many universes out there, and I just mentioned one of the issues with it. Of course, even if it's true, you still seem to need a creator. But National Geographic, a number of years ago, actually drew a picture of what they suspect the multiverse may look like. Here's what they said. Self-generating universes grow like branches from a tree trunk, and in a model that allows the universe to create itself. Can you create yourself? Hello, McFly. You have to exist prior to creating. What's this business about creating yourself? I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let some graphic artist down at National Geographic draw some sort of demented French horn to get me to believe that's how we got here. One scientist in the article was very honest. He said, it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. Now, all this information led this man, Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer who started the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA. He wrote a book in 1992 called God and the Astronomers. He originally wrote it in 78. He updated it in 92. And he goes through the evidence that the universe had a beginning. And he's not saying he's a believer, but he says the evidence shows the universe had a beginning. And when he gets to the end of the book, here's how he ends the book. This is worth the price of the book. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, for me, I don't see any reason why we ought not be teaching this evidence in a public school. It has nothing to do with the Bible. I mean, it's congruent with the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know there was a beginning. The Bible says there was a beginning, but you can look at science and philosophy to show there was a beginning. All right, the second argument, and there's a lot more in the book, I left a lot out. The second argument is the argument from design known as the teleological argument. And this is the argument that William Paley may have made famous when he talked about the watch in the woods. If you found this watch in the woods, would you think it was made by natural law? You're walking along, you see this watch in the woods or in the parking lot, and you pick it up and you go, this is a diamond-studded Rolex. This thing was made by the wind and the rain. I don't need to turn it in. No, you'd say, if there's a watch, there has to be a watchmaker. Well, it turns out that both the universe and life are a lot more designed than a watch. So let's just take a look at the universe first. We'll spend most of our time on it. It's been discovered over the past 50 or 60 years that the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life, and even fine-tuned for there to be a universe at all. And the fine-tuning of the universe says there's a number of things about our universe that are set just right that if you were just to modify any of them slightly, there would be no universe and there certainly wouldn't be any life. In fact, this was kind of put in a comical way by this man, Chuck Lorre. Does anyone know who Chuck Lorre is? Who is he? Yes, he produces The Big Bang Theory and some other TV programs. And at the end of these programs, he normally puts up a screen for 2 or 3 seconds, but it may be a real long saying on it. The only way you can read it is if you DVR it and then freeze it. So I happened to see this once. Here is what Chuck Lorre said after one of these programs. He said, in no particular order, I could not or would not exist without air, food, water, gravity, tides, the moon, the sun, night, civilization, the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics, the law of the land, ancestors having sex, DNA, viruses, bacteria, plants, animals, oceans, ice caps, the kindness of strangers, the Big Bang, familiar bonds, smart people, brave people, memory, medicine, the periodic table of elements, tribal instincts, magnetic fields, weather, Earth's molten core, a rotating Earth, a tilted Earth, tectonic plates, sleep, death, heat, consciousness, evolution, teachers, and the miraculous self-regulating chemical factory that is my body. Outside of that, I like to think of myself as a self-made man. Think about how many things we're dependent on just to exist. And some of these things have to do with the fine-tuning of the universe. For example, Stephen Hawking, again an atheist, put it this way about the initial conditions of the universe. When the universe began, here's what happened, according to Hawking. If the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. From the very beginning of the universe appears to be fine-tuned. Now, let's go back to the argument we just had, the cosmological argument. If that argument works, if the universe did have a beginning, whatever created space, matter, and time must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because only persons make choices, and a choice was made to create. Now you add this being is also intelligent. Why? Because the creation event wasn't a random event. It was a highly fine-tuned event. If it were altered slightly, there would be no universe. So we could talk all day about biological evolution and whether or not that's true. That's really irrelevant to this point, because this point shows that there had to be a designer from the very beginning of the universe, long before you ever get to biology. Not only that, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. Neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches, but this is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction across a scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. That's how fine-tuned the gravitational force is. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just landed there by chance. By the way, when scientists use the word chance, what do they really mean? What does chance mean? Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities, but is chance a cause? No. I mean, who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. There's not a causal force known as chance. When we use the word chance, what we really mean is we don't know. We don't know. The best, it seems to me, inference to the best explanation is the same being that created and designed the universe is the same being that set the gravitational force right where it is. And by the way, there are scores of these constants. Change any one of them, we're not here. Our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Where are we in the solar system? Right here, third rock from the sun. Who said you don't learn from sitcoms? Right there. Look at that. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is? That's a lie. It's too hot in Oklahoma in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Oxygen in this room right now is 21%. If it were 15%, we'd all suffocate. If it were 25%, spontaneous fires would break out. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yes, Jupiter's cosmic gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these purple marks are? Those purple marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Oh, you want to see the size of Jupiter? Check this out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. All right, take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. All right, take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. It's inside our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, you got Arcturus now. Keep an eye on Arcturus. Where is Arcturus now? Right here, left of the white star Rigel. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here, I don't name the stars, okay? Betelgeuse here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. In fact, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. I was out in the Desert Museum a number of years ago in Tucson. If you ever get to go to Tucson, go out there in the summer or even in the winter, you can go to the Desert Museum. And if you go out at night, you're far from the city lights. If the guide takes you outside, look up, because if it's a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night, and the guide goes, "It's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we'll see the space shuttle in orbit." I said, "Oh, come on. We're not going to see the space shuttle in orbit. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up." Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, "Look!" And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the sky out of the west, relative to us, about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. You like my space shuttle? Was still reflecting off of it. And then when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. Goes around the Earth once every hour and 15 minutes. 18,000 miles an hour is 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be here. 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles at 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take? How long? 44 years. I heard that. Anybody else? It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, going 5 miles a second, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We can hardly get out of our solar system. Who'd like to go to the next nearest star? We'll go. Get in, kids! Are we almost there yet, Dad? Another 200,000 years. Play some more Xbox. You got to hold it. There's no way we're ever going to get to another planet or another solar system out there. We can get to Mars maybe, but it's just too far. But let's just suppose we do figure out a way to go at the speed of light. Even at the speed of light, the next nearest star is like 3 or 4 miles, or 3 or 4 light years away. Let's just say we figure it out, and we get there, and we plan our flight. Now, this is a little bit disturbing, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. We'll need sound for this, Andrew. Okay. Imagine we get to this place, this planet. We plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video, and she smiled just a little bit, and she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Okay, you were thinking that, weren't you? Now, how many stars are out there? You know how many stars are out there? The number of stars that are out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the Earth. Do you see this picture here? This is from the ground. You see that little square right here? That's that square from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are stars, planets, heavenly bodies, galaxies. February 1st, 2003, President Bush goes into the East Room of the White House. It's Saturday afternoon. They turn the TV camera on. Every major network carries his address. For a Saturday afternoon, why? The President looks in the camera and says, "My fellow Americans, this morning our country experienced a great tragedy. Upon re-entry into the atmosphere, the space shuttle Columbia burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The Columbia is lost." The President then went on to quote from Isaiah chapter 40, beginning in verse 25. Why Isaiah chapter 40? Because according to Isaiah, God is speaking, and here's what God says. "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, God's saying, you want a comparison to who I am? Here it is. "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and names them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." The President then looked back in the camera and said, "The same God that created and named all those stars is the same God that created and knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. While they did not return safely home to us, we can all now pray they've all returned safely home." You want to know who God is like? Most Christians have the wrong idea of who God is like. You want to know who God is like? Meditate on the attributes of God. He's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, just, loving, all knowledge. Meditate on those attributes, then remove all limits from your mind. That's God. Why is there a second commandment, thou shalt make no graven image? Because any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of an infinite being. Oh, you can draw a picture of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus had two natures. He had a human nature, which you can draw, and a divine nature you can't draw. In fact, Psalm 103 verse 11 says, God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? Number of stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. From our perspective, infinite. That's the point. That's why it says the heavens declare the glory of God. The closest thing in our experience to infinity are the heavens, and even they're finite. So you can look into a telescope and see design, but you can also look into a microscope. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but we're just going to have a few minutes. Let's go back to when you were in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. Actually, let's go back earlier. Let's go back all the way to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some old people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together, first of all, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg. And then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter genetic code, or genome, that makes you up. The other part of you at that point was your mother's egg, and it was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter genome that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. In fact, your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there are only 4 things that separated you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate that little beautiful baby and that little beautiful baby from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, we don't kill little babies outside the womb. Why do we kill them inside the womb? You say, wait, Frank, now you're going down the sex road. This is a problem. Don't you know that you can't legislate morality? Newsflash. All laws legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, don't legislate your morality, I go, I don't want to legislate my morality. And I don't want to legislate your morality either. Look, I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the only way to have a society that you can nurture the next generation with is to privilege a relationship between a man and a woman at the exclusion of any other. I didn't make this stuff up. This is not my morality. This is the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. So I don't want to legislate my morality. I didn't make it up. It's not me. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity took place inside of you. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, other cells lung cells, other cells heart cells. How do they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. Are you concentrating on this? Or are you sitting there, Frank, hold on, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells, coming right up. No. You're not thinking about any of this. Well, how is it happening? If you're not thinking about this, yet this process is goal-directed, it's going toward an end, there must be an external intellect directing it toward an end. This is what Aristotle called final causality, that all of nature is going toward a final end, a final cause. It's goal-directed. If it's goal-directed, there must be a mind directing it. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s said, "This is my fifth way to argue for God." Nature itself is goal-directed, whether conscious or non-conscious. For example, why does an acorn always become an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree, or a birch tree, or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree, really. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I need to do to become an oak tree? Let's see if we can figure that. No. Why does it reliably become an oak tree if it's properly nourished? Because there's an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what we mean by God. That's why Paul said, in Him we live and move and have our being. And the writer of Hebrews said, God sustains all things by His powerful word. God just doesn't create and then leaves the universe. God creates and sustains it to this very minute, this very second. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music, however, the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe, and He keeps all the natural forces and all the processes going in their given direction. He's sustaining it to this very minute, this very second. All right, much more in the book on that, but we got to move on to our final argument and get to your questions. This final argument has to do more with a philosophical position than the scientific positions. And the question here is, where does the moral compass point? Does it point to you? Does it point to me? Or does it point to something outside of ourselves? February of last year, I was invited to go to a church and speak there several nights. It was in South Dakota. And the second night I was there, we were going through the I don't have enough faith to be an atheist material. And at the Q&A mic, there were a couple of young men in their 20s who were expressing some skepticism about the existence of God. I didn't think anything of it, because if you call something I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, atheists are going to show up and challenge it. I agree with that. That's good. I didn't think anything about it. But the next night, the last night I was there, about a 50-year-old man got up to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 pieces of paper. And he started to read the question, and after about 10 seconds, he just couldn't read anymore. He started crying. So I walked down to the microphone, and he handed me the 2 sheets of paper, and he said, "Read them, read them." And so I was walking back up to the platform trying to digest this 2-page question, and by the time I got up to the platform, I realized that this man was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1. This man just discovered recently that a friend of the family, a man in his 40s, had been sexually molesting this man's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14. Right in his own home, under his nose, and he never saw it. The second reason this man was upset was the 2 men who were there the night before, the 2 young men who were expressing skepticism about God were his sons, who used to be Christians. But after this happened to their sister, they said, there is no God. If there was a good God, he wouldn't allow this to happen to our sister. In fact, one of them was in a Roman Catholic seminary, and he left the seminary and said, that's it, I'm done. There's no God. So the man's name was Steve. I said, Steve, it's okay to be mad at God. The Bible writers are mad at God. Read some of the Psalms. Read Lamentations. Read Habakkuk. God, where are you? What's going on? It's okay to be mad at God. God can take it. But at some point, Steve, I think your sons will realize this is not a good argument against God. And I said, by the way, do you think we could maybe talk about this privately instead of in front of 300 people? He said, sure. So the thing got over at 10 p.m. I said, Steve, let's go to dinner. So we went to dinner. For about an hour and 15 minutes, Steve just told me, and the pastor was with me, everything that happened. It was cathartic for him, and he couldn't believe that he didn't see this going on. He said this guy, who was a friend of the family, was like Jesus to them. He always carried the Bible around. He was always quoting Bible verses, say, hey, let's pray and all this. It was a big sham. He was a fraud. And I said to him, Steve, I don't know when the right time is, but when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, what that man did to your sister isn't really wrong. It's just your opinion. Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, no standard of goodness beyond humanity, if everything's just molecules in motion, that's just your opinion against that pedophile's opinion. In fact, the very reason you're upset is because you know a great wrong has been done. If a great wrong has been done, there must be something that's right. Because evil only exists if good exists, but good only exists if God exists. Because God, by definition, is what we mean by the standard of good. You see, the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. If evil exists, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but if evil exists, God exists. Not because God is doing evil, but because he's the standard of good by which we would even know what evil was. So evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Oh, by the way, the guy who did this isn't in prison. Everybody knows who did it, but he's walking the streets right now. Why? Because every time the trial comes up, Jessica, the one who was abused, cannot testify against him. She's so conflicted over it. Because he told her that she was going to be his wife and they would have babies together. I mean, she's 4 years old, all the way to 14. So I said, Steve, I want you to say this to your sons at the right time. If there is no God, then the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. He's not going to get justice here on earth if she doesn't testify. And if there is no afterlife, there's no justice either. He just dies and that's it. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know a great injustice has been done. Well, if a great injustice has been done, there must be something known as justice. Because there's no injustice unless there's justice. There's nothing immoral unless there's something moral. There can't be something not right unless something is right. Jessica has decided, however, now that she's 18, that she's not going to allow this to pass without some good coming from it. So she decided to write a book. Here it is. Not Your Princess by Jessica Mitchell. I read one chapter of this and couldn't read anymore. And the reason I'm telling it to you is because her father, Steve, wants everybody to know about this. Because this happens too frequently in American homes all over the country. Parents, older people, if a young person ever comes to you and says, Uncle Joe did this to me, do not dismiss it. maybe Uncle Joe would do that to you. Too many parents give the small children the Heisman as if, no, this can't be happening. And they don't know where to turn. If anything is evil, and this is evil, agreed? Then God must exist. Now we can ask the question, why would God allow something to continue? That's another question. But the point here is that God's nature is morality's true north. I'm not saying atheists can't know morality or be good people. That's not my point. My point is they have no way to justify morality. Because if there is no standard beyond us, i.e. God, an authoritative moral standard, you can't say that something is really right and something else is really wrong. Now, let's sum all this up and get to your questions. From these three arguments, we can draw some conclusions. From the cosmological argument, we can see that the being that created the universe is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space. Secondly, this being is also extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize everything we create out of pre-existing material? Try and create out of nothing. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. From the design argument, we can see this being is extremely intelligent. We can also see that this being sustains creation and has purpose. He doesn't just leave the universe, he sustains it. From the moral argument, we can see this being is absolutely morally perfect, and this being is also personal. You say, why? How do you know from the moral argument he's personal? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. We also know, by the way, this being is personal from the cosmological argument, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone has to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Impersonal forces can't make choices. Like, for example, gravity isn't sitting there going, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to his hand, right? It just does the same thing over and over again, which leads me to Stephen Hawking, who I started with, who wrote in his book, The Grand Design, on page 181, he wrote this. Here's his explanation for how the universe came into existence, because he agrees it came into existence. He said, because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. John Lennox, a Christian professor at Oxford University, said, nonsense is still nonsense even when spoken by brilliant scientists. First of all, gravity didn't exist. Secondly, gravity can't create anything. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. The best explanation for how we got here appears to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, morally perfect personal being. Now notice, we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, sustaining creator who has purpose and is absolutely morally perfect and personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet, and we appear to have a being that looks like the God of the Bible. Now, does this mean it necessarily is the God of the Bible? No. Might be, but we don't know yet. In other words, it could be just the God of Judaism, right? Yeah, it could be the God of Christianity. It could also maybe potentially be the God of Islam. How would we be able to figure out which one of the theistic world religions is true, if any? Maybe just theism is true. Maybe none of these are true after that. What we could do is go to the next step, and that is, are miracles possible? Because God can tell us which one of these is true simply by doing miracles through somebody. Now, let me just say a word about miracles, and maybe next semester we'll come back and talk about them another time. A lot of people can't believe in miracles because they've never seen one, and miracles they think don't occur, and how can you believe in Jonah and Noah and all these crazy miracles in the Old Testament? Let me just ask you one question. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, it's not the resurrection. That's an easy miracle compared to the greatest. Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if it's true that God, there's a being out there that really created space, time, and matter and everything in it there, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside of space, time, and matter? No, if he can create the whole show out of nothing, then he can walk on water. He can raise Jesus from the dead. He can even do the Jonah miracle, believe it or not. That's easy for God to create the universe out of nothing. Well, the interesting point is we have good scientific and philosophical evidence that the first verse of the Bible is true. If the first verse is true, maybe the other verses are true as well. One other thing about miracles, you often hear people saying, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. Now that's a pretty silly reason if you think about it, because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You've never seen your mind. You believe in it. You're using it right now to believe in it. You've never seen the laws of logic. You believe in those. You've never seen the laws of mathematics. You believe in those. You've never seen love. Oh, you've seen it expressed, but you've never seen it. Why? Because it's not made of molecules. What's the chemical composition of the love molecule? How much carbon is in the justice molecule? These are silly questions. Why? Because these are not material things. They're immaterial things. Yet every one of us in here believes in love and justice. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe in him. And by the way, you ought not see a lot of miracles. Why? Because miracles, by definition, have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. If they're going to be signs from God, they can't be happening all the time. If they happened all the time, then we'd think there's some sort of natural law. Imagine if people popped up from the dead routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? For you Christians in here, you go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, they have to be rare events. They can't be regular events. If they're regular events, then we consider them some sort of natural cause. So there's a lot more to this, but maybe next time we'll do it. If you want to go further, the books and the DVDs you can get on our website. This should be FF. Type in crossexamine.org/FF if you want this PowerPoint presentation. Also, we're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Like our Facebook page. We sometimes stream these events, so if you like our Facebook page, the Cross Examine Facebook page, you can see this again or at another school. And we have two pages, crossexamine.org and Dr. Frank Turek, Dr. Frank Turek. And by the way, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Okay? Have you signed up for UTwitface yet? We're on radio Saturdays. We're also on DirecTV Wednesdays. And if you don't do anything else, at least download the free app. What's the free app? The free app is the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store. Not only does it have all of our podcasts on there, it streams our TV show. It also has a quick answer section. So it has the quick answers to the common objections you'll hear. Say you're having lunch with somebody and they say something that's an objection to Christianity and you're not quite sure how to answer it if you're a Christian. You can take out your iPhone, your Droid, or if you're one of the 12 people in the world with a Windows phone, it works on that too. Okay? We got that for you too. And you can go to the quick answers section, and as they're talking, you can get a response to what they're saying. So as they're talking, you can go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? All right? Download it, it's free. There's over 120,000 downloads for that now, so check that out. It also works on your iPad and all that kind of business, okay? All right, with that being said, we got to go to Q&A.